just jump right into this show tonight because I'm very excited about the topic and the book and our guest, the book's author, Lynn Kasten. We're going to be talking tonight about Lynn's book, Secret Journey to Planet SERPO, which was published in 2013. And before we do that, I want to tell you a little bit about Lynn, but if you know anyone that is really interested in Roswell, saucers or spacecraft crashing and maybe being retro-engineered here on Earth, interstellar travel, give them a call right now and tell them to get online and listen, because that's what this show is about tonight. Lynn, let me give you his website before I start the introduction, is et-secrethistory.com. I'll put that up in the chat room in a little bit. Lynn actually went to Cornell up here in New York State. Lynn's in Arizona with us tonight. But he went to Cornell and got a BA in Liberal Arts and an MFA in Creative Writing from National University. And after graduating, he went to the U.S. Air Force Aviation Cadet Program. And while he was there, he had his very own personal UFO encounter, which he may be able to tell us something about later. Lynn has been involved in UFO and ET-related research for over 30 years. He's a former member of NICAP and MUFON. NICAP is the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomenon. And he's also published over 60 original articles for Atlantis Rising magazine in the United States and New Dawn magazine in Australia and New Zealand, including 10 cover stories. His first book, I believe, was based on some of the articles he wrote for Atlantis Rising magazine, and the name of that one is The Secret History of Extraterrestrials, published in 2010. The one we're talking about tonight, as I said, is A Secret Journey to Planet SERPO. It's been on the publisher's top 10 list for over 6 months already. And he's been interviewed on over 40 radio shows. He's presented at numerous lectures and conferences, and his books, both of them, are available at Amazon.com, and I believe there are links from his website, again, et-secrethistory.com. So you need to go there and check it out. Lynn, let's just jump right into it. Welcome to Epic Voyages.
Thanks a lot, Laurel. Nice to be with you.
I bet it's a lot warmer where you are in Arizona than it is in Western New York.
Oh, absolutely. 73 degrees today.
Well, we're at 2 degrees right now, and lately this is an absolute hot spell for us, considering what we've been through.
What city in New York are you in?
I'm out in the country, in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, between Buffalo and Rochester, but south towards Pennsylvania. So we catch all the weather coming up over the Great Lakes.
Oh yeah, right. Okay, so you're down by the that's right. Okay, you're south of Buffalo.
Yeah, if you drew a line between Buffalo and Rochester, which would go due east-west, and then in the middle of that line drop south about 45 miles, that's where I am.
Okay, you near Lilydale by any chance?
Pretty close. That's a little bit west of me, but I've been to Lilydale, and that's almost right on Lake Erie. Yep.
That's my next article, by the way, Lilydale.
Oh, wonderful. In Atlantis Rising?
No, New Dawn.
Oh, interesting. I'll have to look for that.
Okay.
So you've been there?
No, I'm going. Oh, I'm going to wait till the snow melts.
Yeah, you better. They got a whole new crop of it the last couple of days, and you don't want to go there now.
I know, I heard about it.
Well, before I start asking you questions about the book, I want to give everybody a little bit of a heads up, and I want to congratulate you on actually almost having 3 books in one, in my opinion. And by that I mean that I so much enjoyed your brief history of the Nazi technology and all of the work they did in the 30s and 40s and their little adventures down in the Antarctica at Neuschwabenland. I really enjoyed that. It was very informative. And then you did a whole section about the various crashes of spacecraft in the 40s in the USA, and there are a lot more than I even knew about. So that again was new information to me. And then, of course, most of your book is about the exchange between the Zeta Reticuli or planet SERPO beings and 12 people from Earth who actually traveled to SERPO and lived for, they were going for 10 years, but they wound up staying there for 13 because time was just very difficult to adjust to, considering that there's two suns and they couldn't tell time with Earth clocks. So I can't wait to get into all of this. I know there's details in your book that a lot of people haven't heard unless they bought the book yet. So I'm hoping that they buy the book and check it out because it's really fascinating. So you talk in the beginning, I'm not going to go into alphabet soup with you tonight, but I do want you to say something about the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, because they play a big role in this, don't they?
Yes, they do. In fact, they are the key to the revelation of the entire story. If this had been left in the hands of the CIA, we never would have gotten this information. Would have stayed buried for sure.
Okay, and they are not any one of the other agencies who then morphed into this one and then maybe morphed back. This is a completely separate agency, and it was initiated, was it by Kennedy?
Yes, by Kennedy and his Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, the two of them.
And so when did the DIA come into being?
1961.
Okay.
When Kennedy took office.
And I remember from reading other books that the CIA and Kennedy had like a blood feud going on. And apparently the FBI, the CIA, the National Security Agency, and I don't know who else, were not sharing a lot of information. So I guess he formed the DIA so he had a direct line?
Well, on paper, the DIA was formed to combine all the different military intelligence agencies. At that point, the Navy, the Air Force, the Army, the Air Force didn't even exist at that point. The Navy, the Army, the Coast Guard, they all had their own intelligence agencies, especially the Navy, which had a very venerable and respected intelligence agency going back to 1890-something. Well, that was one of the reasons, but the real main reason was the fact that he and the CIA they did exactly that. They had a blood feud going, mainly over the Bay of Pigs disaster. Mm-hmm. That was the big problem. But really, it was more of a clash between he and Allen Dulles more than anything. Mm-hmm. And that's why he fired Allen Dulles.
And he was director of the CIA at that time.
Yes, he was.
Okay. So I remember that timing. As a matter of fact, I grew up in Dallas, and I remember well the day that Kennedy was shot. I was in junior high school. So this is like hearing the real news for me instead of just what they show on television. Is the DIA still operational, or is?
Oh yes, sure, yeah, they are. Yeah,
I'll be darned.
And it was a DIA that revealed this information in 2005. That's how we got it.
Okay, 2005. Now, I've mentioned your website, the et-secrethistory.com. There's another website that I guess, I don't know if this is the first one that information went out on, but tell us a little bit about SERPO.org. What is that website about?
Well, SERPO.org is the original SERPO website. The information revealed by Anonymous went out to that website. Actually, Anonymous was a member of a UFO network called the UFO Thread List, which consisted of about 150 individuals who were mainly insiders, ex-intelligence, ex-military people. These were not just a collection of people interested in UFOs. These people knew a lot about what had gone on in the military, and Anonymous was a member of the UFO Thread List. And that thread list was moderated by somebody named Victor Martinez. And Victor became a very important player in this whole story because he accepted the information from Anonymous that was released to the thread list, and eventually it was he that made the decision, more or less, to devote an entire website to the information. And that was done by Bill Ryan, who was another member of the thread list. So Bill put it together, and Bill moderated the website.
Do
And
you
that
have?
website still exists. It was started in 2000 and early 2006 or late 2005. It's still out there, but it's very confusing. It's got about 13,000 words at last count, and a lot of it is very disorganized. That's why I thought the book was necessary, to put it back into a more organized way. And also, in the event that the website was taken down, we would have had no other information about SERPO. So
Mm-hmm.
the book was necessary for that reason.
Well, I do congratulate you on your ability to organize a really disparate set of information, because you did a great job. It was very easy to follow. And even having said that, I really do want to go back and read it again after a few months and let it sort of gel, because there's so much detail here. It's hard to just, I want to tell people about this, but I can't remember all the details consistently.
One of the reasons was to make it a reference book that you could go back and look at the detail when you needed to, as well as tell the story in a logical sequence, both.
Mm-hmm. Well, back to one of the things that I said when I said it was 3 books in one. I really love this section on the Nazi technology in the 30s and 40s, and how they got to the Antarctic, and they named it Neuschwabenland. Why don't you tell us something about that?
Well, I made the case in my first book, The Secret History of Extraterrestrials, which was, as you said, published in 2010. Mm-hmm. I made the case in that book for the fact that Hitler had made a pact with an extraterrestrial race that we now refer to as the reptilians.
Okay.
And they basically have lived in an underground civilization, primarily in Asia, between Tibet and India, that's sometimes referred to as Snake Land, the land of the Nagas. But they also had a colony in Antarctica. And my belief is that colony is ancient and probably goes back to the days of Atlantis, because when they first founded that colony under Antarctica, it was in a temperate zone. So I think the Earth has shifted, and that's when it became covered with ice. But they maintained that civilization under Antarctica. And that's why, since they already had a pact with the Germans, with Hitler, the Germans decided to also build a colony there under Antarctica.
Okay.
That was the main reason for it. And they started building that colony in 1938, before World War II.
Say that again. They started building it in 1938, before World War II.
Before World War II, yes.
And did they know the reptilians were there at that time?
That's my belief, yes, absolutely.
Okay, so 38, and here the war starts up, and they were still there at the end of the war, right?
Yes, they were.
So why didn't they ever invade the U.S. from there?
Well, we learned about the base in 1946.
Okay.
And we sent an armada down there to destroy it, headed up by Admiral Byrd in late 46. 13 ships and 6,800 Marines, and it was a very complicated and sophisticated attack force. And the purpose of it was to destroy the Nazi base in Antarctica. And we knew all about it because the British knew all about it, and the British had shared their intelligence with us, and the British had tried to destroy it twice, and were not able to complete the job. Mm. So we learned about it, and Forrestal, who was then the Secretary of Defense, and President Truman decided to go ahead with that operation.
Now, this Admiral Byrd is Richard Byrd, who actually had been to Antarctica before as an explorer, right?
Yes, he had. Yeah.
Okay. And you mentioned the Marines, and there were, I think, aircraft carriers and all other kinds of military vessels and so forth. Did they ever see saucers when they got down there? This is 1946 now. This is after the war's over. So did they ever see saucers, or can you tell us about that?
They were originally, it was originally planned as a 6-month operation during the Antarctic summer. Uh, After 2 months, they turned around and left because of what they encountered there. They sent out the attack force, which was a pincer movement from both sides of the continent, as well as planes loaded with explosives going directly over the continent. However, when they got to the mouth of the tunnel, which came out in the Weddell Sea, it's called the Weddell Sea, which is, I guess you'd call it the northern perimeter of Antarctica. The saucers came out of the water and engaged the ships in a 20-minute engagement. And in those 20 minutes, they sank at least one ship that we know of, and approximately the information I have from the Russian information is that approximately 68 Marines were also killed in that engagement. And Admiral Byrd realized that he was outclassed immediately because the saucers were able to dart in and out of range, and they destroyed a lot of the ships. I don't know how many were destroyed, but enough damage was done that Byrd realized he had to get out of there, and he did.
Okay, so 2 months into it, he called it off. They turned around. They came back this way, and this would have been
March of 47.
March of 47. They started in February and March. They called it off, and
actually started in December of 46.
Okay. So these discs, these flying saucers, literally came out of the water. They didn't come from some hole in the ground on dry land. They came out of the water.
Out of the water.
I think I remember reading in the book it was several tens of thousands, if not a couple of 100,000 Nazi troops had already been relocated there. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that Jim Mars and others believe that that's the so-called Lost Battalion. That those are the troops that couldn't be accounted for. Mm-hmm. I believe it was approximately 150,000. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Is believed that they also went to live in Antarctica. Yes.
Wow. Do you suppose any of those folks or not the reptilians? I'll get to them in a second, but do you think any of those Germans are still down there, that they've lived and maybe reproduced and had families?
Absolutely, yeah. The city there is called New Berlin, and my understanding was that as early as 1947, there were already 40,000 people living in New Berlin. Which was considered the capital of New Schwabenland.
Say that again. How many were living there in New Berlin?
My understanding was that there were about 40,000 living there at that time. So at this point, if it still exists, which I'm sure it does, mm-hmm. The population has got to be well over 2-3 million, perhaps.
Oh my goodness! And then, in addition to those, there are reptilians that are still there.
Yes. The original intent of the base was not as a refuge for the German population. Hitler didn't care that the German population was being wiped out by Allied bombing raids. That wasn't his concern anymore. The only people that he would send to the Antarctic colony were the purest Aryan examples, men and women. Mm-hmm. Blonde, blue-eyed women between 17 and 24, and the battle-hardened Waffen-SS troops were the ones that settled Antarctica because the intent was to create a new Aryan race, mm-hmm. Which would have been the Fourth Reich.
The master race.
Yes.
Wow. Okay, so Admiral Byrd orders everybody to turn around and leave after having encountered these flying discs that came up out of the water and destroyed ships and tens of thousands of our military.
No, not tens of thousands. No. Only.
Oh, that's right.
All we know about is that about 68. We know that around 68 men died in that engagement, but it may have been more.
Okay, sorry. So he comes back to the U.S. and he's debriefed April. Say a little bit about about what happened then.
Well, he said that we were no longer safe. America was no longer safe, that there were now craft that could fly from pole to pole at extremely high speeds, and that we no longer had, by being isolated by two oceans, we're no longer safe, really. And he suggested to Congress turning Antarctica into a thermonuclear test range. And, of course, they didn't go along with that. And he got angry, and from what we understand, the Congress believed that he was now a liability in terms of spilling this whole story to the press. And he wound up in a mental institution after that, and he couldn't give any more interviews.
Wow. I mean, no one probably can answer this question based on facts, but do you think he just kind of, that experience in February and March at Antarctica affected him so seriously that he just never got over it?
It could be, but I think it's more likely that the Congress didn't want him talking about this.
Oh, okay.
And they shut him up. They just shut him up. I mean, he had such a distinguished record of exploration and bravery in World War II. There was no reason why he should have been taken out of action, but he was well respected around the world. But apparently, he knew too much.
Wow. And I remember in your book you said that not only did he give that report in the debriefing, but he was very passionately emotional about it while he was talking, right?
That's the story that has emerged, yes.
Wow. Okay, well, I'm going to take a second here and remind everybody exactly what we're doing here tonight. You're listening to Epic Voyages Radio, and we're talking with Lynn Kasten, the author of Secret Journey to Planet SERPO, published in 2013. And I highly recommend that you get online with Amazon.com or go to Lynn's website, et-secrethistory.com, and order yourself a copy because it's well worth the read. So let's talk about UFO crashes. One of the things, and this is the second of the 3 books in one that I mentioned earlier, I was surprised to see the number of crashes in the 40s and the 50s. I didn't know about some of these. Why don't you kind of start at the beginning, and if you can kind of do an inventory of when and what happened to the crafts themselves and any beings that were found in them.
The whole story of those early crashes was revealed in a book by Leonard Stringfield in the 40s. He was the authority, and he started the whole interest. He started the whole interest in the Roswell crash in that book, that first book that he wrote. And in that book, all I know about was the crash that occurred off the coast of San Diego in 1941, which was recovered by the Navy, and the crash in May of 47, which was 2 months before Roswell, which also crashed in New Mexico. And that had an entirely different race of extraterrestrials. They were not the Ebens, which were the ones that crashed in Roswell. They were the ones that had 6 fingers and toes, and that was the one that showed up in the Santilli autopsy film. Okay. And supposedly 3 of the aliens of that crash survived, but they died shortly thereafter. And nobody seems to know what happened to the one that remained alive.
Okay. I meant to ask you this before we left that last topic. The reptilians are not the same as the Ebens, right?
No connection. No connection whatsoever.
And explain where this term Eben came from.
Well, the aliens that crashed at Roswell, one of them survived. There were two alien craft involved here. They collided with each other northwest of Roswell. The one that crashed at near Corona, 4 aliens died in that crash, but 1 survived. And 5 aliens died in the crash that the craft that landed near Datil, New Mexico. That wasn't discovered, though, until 1949.
The crash itself, what was left of it, wasn't discovered until 49.
Well, actually, the one that crashed in Datil was pretty much intact.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the one that crashed at Roswell was pretty much broken up, but there were still large chunks of it available for inspection and for research.
And the one that they didn't find until 49, I'm assuming that whoever was in that was still in it dead.
Yeah, they were all dead.
Okay.
They had been out in the sun for 2 years, so.
Ugh.
But what the sun didn't get, animals did.
Oh, jeez. Okay, so, and you said that there was one. So I remember reading in the book, I think, that you indicated that the debris field was so extensive from the two craft that collided that it just kind of strung all the way out towards Roswell over, like, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 miles.
Yeah, well, that was on the ranch of Mac Brazel, and he was the one that reported it, and that's how it all got started.
Okay. So which one was the one where they came up with this live Eben?
That was the one northwest of Roswell.
Northwest of Roswell. And this would have been, 47?
That's right. Yeah, he was packed off to Los Alamos.
Okay. And
he was a little injured, but they took care of that somehow. I'm not sure how they took care of it. They were able to bring him back to normalcy, and they sent him to Los Alamos.
Okay. And did they also take what was left of the craft to Los Alamos, or did that go to Wright-Patt?
The craft went to Wright-Patterson, but it eventually ended up at Area 51.
Okay. And was it intact enough that they tried to kind of put it back together again and retro-engineer it?
Well, that's another story. It was intact enough so that the device that they called the communications device, which was the device that the aliens used to communicate with their home planet, that was still intact. And that became the key to the whole story of SERPO. The fact that device remained intact, and we were able to use it eventually.
Okay, so we've got one Eben who is in Los Alamos, and he gets there around summer of 47. And how long does he live there? And does he stay there the whole time?
He stayed there for the 5 years.
Okay.
He remained alive for 5 years. He died in 52, the summer of 52. But prior to his death, just prior to his death, we figured out how to use that communications device. He wasn't able to tell us how to make it work, but we figured out, the scientists at Los Alamos figured out that in order for it to work, it had to be reattached to the power source on the craft itself. When they did that, it worked, and they were able to use it. He was able to use it to communicate with his home planet. And he did send 6 messages that summer, 1952, before he died. One of those messages was a suggestion for an exchange program. And probably that was done at the behest of his handlers, his military handlers. He wouldn't have done that if we hadn't suggested it, I don't think. And probably, most likely, that suggestion really came from Eisenhower himself. It wouldn't have been something that a military handler would have been able to make on his own. Wouldn't be able to do that himself. And so that was the very first mention of an exchange program, was that 5th message that he sent in 1952 before he died.
Okay, so then he died, and I guess they still had the remains of the other ones who died in the crash also?
Yeah, they were being kept in a cryogenic facility at Los Alamos.
Okay, so when he finally reached them and suggested that, well, I can't remember now what he suggested, but did he ask them to come and pick him up, or did he ask them to...
Yeah, that was one of the messages, was he wanted a rescue, yeah.
Okay.
And the subject, all 6 messages I have on my website somewhere, the subjects of all of the messages. And they were all successfully transmitted. And he received answers to those messages. However, he had to translate the answers back to English, and that was not easily done because the communications, the language barrier was impossible. They spoke in such a strange language that some of our top language people could not really understand it.
Let's talk about that for a minute, because that was really interesting to me in the book, and connect it with a portrayal. I'm not going to say what movie, but a portrayal that we've probably all seen and how similar it is to that. Tell us about their language.
Well, their language was, our people in their diaries described it as high-pitched singing. It sounded like screaming and singing. It was not quite as pleasant as Spielberg portrayed it in his Close Encounters. He connected it with mathematics. Spielberg connected it with mathematics and with and music and mathematics. It was much more like they. One of the Americans said it sounded like a high-pitched screaming match when they were talking to each other.
Wow.
So we had 18 language specialists sent to Los Alamos and working on it, and they couldn't not even understand a word of it.
That's got to be very frustrating.
So that was the big problem, was whatever answers the EBE number 1 received back, he had to translate for us, and there may have been a lot lost in translation.
Oh, I can imagine that there would be. Let's see, I was going to ask you something about the language. You described it as tonal, and I know what I was going to ask. You said that their IQs on average were, on average, higher than human IQs. Yeah. So there was a better chance that they could pick up English, much better chance than we could learn their language, right?
Right, and that's eventually what worked out to allow us to communicate with them, because we sent them a textbook of English, literally, and they picked it up very quickly, although they couldn't really put sentences together very well, but they did well enough for them to communicate from that point on in rough English, and that's what made the difference.
Okay, now back up. You said that they sent them a textbook on how to learn English, so obviously this has to have been when the rescue ship came to pick up the one who died in the summer of 55 or 52? 52.
No, he died in 52.
Okay, so when did the rest? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Let me give you the content of the 6 messages.
Okay.
The first message was just to let his planet know that he was alive. The second message explained the crash in 47 and the death of his crew. The third message asked for a rescue craft for himself. And then the fourth message suggested a formal meeting with leaders of Earth. The fifth message was the one that suggested an exchange program. And the sixth message provided landing coordinates for any future rescue or visitation to Earth. But of course, he was not able to give the correct landing coordinates because he didn't really understand our mathematics at that point. So that was useless. In any case, he got responses to all 6 messages, but then he had to communicate them back to us. And according to what he told us at Los Alamos, they liked the idea of the exchange program, but they were not willing to do it until 10 years later, 1962. Our people thought that was rather strange, and they wanted a clarification from him, but before he could give that clarification, he died. Okay. So that's the way it was left in 1952.
So when did this ship come and then pick him and the remains of the others up? And I guess that's when they got the How to Learn English textbook from us?
No, what happened after that was after he died, the scientists at Los Alamos eventually learned how to use the device.
Okay.
And began communicating directly with the Evans in rough English. After we sent them, that was the point after which we sent them the English language textbook, and they were able to eventually communicate together, the Los Alamos scientists and the home planet, and that's when they confirmed the exchange program for 1962.
Okay. How did they send the textbook to them if they were... Now, SERPO is supposed to be like 40 light years away or something like that, right?
Yeah, we used that communication device. After
Oh,
the after EBU number one died, we still had the device,
okay.
and by that time we had learned to use it.
Okay. Interesting.
And
That's very interesting.
That's how we started sending them the English language information.
Okay. So, as it stands right now, we're thinking that in 1962 we may have an exchange program, right?
Exactly.
Okay. So now, but before I go to my next question, I want to talk. I want you to say something about which presidents knew how much about all of this.
Well, of course, Eisenhower knew most of it, but the CIA was not sharing the whole story with him either.
Mm-hmm.
But at this point, the DIA did not exist.
Right.
DIA did not come into being until 1961, as we discussed earlier,
Mm-hmm.
when Kennedy became president. So this was still in the hands of the CIA and the military at this point. And it was mainly the military that was doing the communicating with his home planet.
Okay.
What was the question?
I was asking you what that we were expecting to do an exchange program by 1962, and then I said talk about the president. So Eisenhower knew some, but not all of it, because the CIA didn't want to share the information. We know about Kennedy and the CIA; they're not going to tell him anything. He formed the DIA. So Kennedy pretty much knew about all of this, right?
Yeah, Kennedy was briefed on it by the CIA when he came into office. How much Eisenhower knew exactly, I'm not sure. In any case, there's something that happened in '53 that needs to be discussed here.
Okay.
Okay? Our people realized that that little craft that crashed at Roswell could not have made a journey of, we found out that it was 39 light years away.
Okay.
With those 5 aliens aboard. It would have had to have been a much larger ship to have traveled that distance. And my belief is that they then contacted SERPO, which we still didn't know the name of the planet at that point, and said to them, you must have a mothership somewhere in orbit. Why don't you just send down another craft? And they apparently said, okay, because that craft was sent down in February of 1953, and it landed at Kingman, Arizona, with 4 live aliens aboard. It didn't crash, it landed. And we went down and picked it up and took it to the Nevada test site. And the 4 aliens were taken to Los Alamos.
Okay.
And that craft became the one that we copied and eventually back-engineered to build our own. So that by the time Kennedy came into office, we already had a working anti-gravity flying saucer of our own. But we wouldn't have been possible if they hadn't cooperated with us and given us that craft that landed at Kingman, Arizona.
Okay, so basically 4 of their inhabitants came with the craft and stayed sort of as a team to work with us to see if we could develop a way to communicate.
Exactly. And those 4 aliens went to that same little habitat that we had provided for EV number 1. Mm-hmm. And they lived there just like he had. Okay. That's where they were taken. But they were very uncooperative. They were kind of angry, if you want to use that word. And only one of them was willing to even talk to our people. So we had to work on that craft by ourselves. But we did have some other aliens to help us. We had already been in contact with the gray aliens. Mm-hmm. And we know what they look like. Mm-hmm. One of them used to work with one of our scientists, Professor Teller, Dr. Teller, and he would come and help with the building the simulator and back engineering the craft at the Nevada test site, which became Area 51.
Okay, I'm getting questions here, and I'm stockpiling them. So I'm gonna take a break from asking my questions, Lynn, and see if you can answer a few of these from the chat room. And next hour, we're going to open up the dial-in line, 888-919-2355. And we'll have questions from the chat room and also the dial-in line. And if anybody wanted to go to Skype and send a message to Inception Radio Network on Skype, then we'll take them that way too. Question number one: How did you find out all of these details about that you're telling us? How do you know all this?
Well, you mean about the Kingman event?
No, about pretty much all of it. Like that there were 4 of the Ebens, and there was a ship, and the dates, and that 12 humans went back to the planet. Just the whole package. One of our chat room people is saying, so how did he find all of this stuff out?
Almost all of it was on the website, SERPO.org.
The SERPO.org. Okay.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. And that
also,
was...
I had a 2-hour conversation with Bill Ryan in 2005 while we were driving from Laughlin, Nevada to Las Vegas, the shuttle. That whole 2-hour period, I listened to him talk about the whole program, so I learned a lot. I learned a lot in that 2-hour period as well. Mm-hmm. And other conversations I've had with other similar people.
I remember also in the book later on that you mentioned that other presidents were also briefed to some extent about this, and there are some taped briefings with Ronald Reagan somewhere still, right?
Yes, exactly.
So has that all been put out there? Has it been declassified, or are they still classified somewhere?
That briefing of Reagan has been declassified. So that's why I put it. That's why I put it in my book. I thought it was very important that it be in there.
So really, this information is coming from a bunch of different sources, and it's all pointing to exactly the same facts.
Yeah, exactly. What happened was the website was established as a result of the revelations by Anonymous. Okay, in 2005, 2006. But then other people in the UFO thread list who were also involved in the intelligence community and the military community began sending in more information anonymously as well. So they fleshed out the website with more information, and soon we really had a compendium of everything that had happened.
Okay. Here's question number 2. How did they determine that it was 39 light years away, the planet SERPO?
Well, once the decision was made for the exchange program, and we had the communication link working between Los Alamos and their planet, we knew exactly how far away it was. They told us how far away it was.
Okay.
And they told us the star system was Zeta Reticuli, so we knew all of that. And we knew a lot. And we knew a lot about their culture as well before we even sent those 12 people.
Okay. And question number 3. This is kind of a 2-parter, but it's mostly about what kind of propulsion do they use to go this 40 light years? How long does it take? And I guess you're going to have to bring in wormholes into that. So.
Right. Exactly. They had to travel through wormholes. Our people did not really know. Our 12 people did not really know how they were getting there.
Okay.
They were more or less kept in a bubble, 12 different bubbles that were closed most of the trip. But they eventually were allowed to walk around the ship freely, and the ship was huge. The commander said that at one point he was standing in a room with a ceiling that was about 100 feet high. And don't forget that we sent 40 tons of equipment and supplies with them. Mm-hmm. So they had to accommodate all of that on their ship. In any case, our people got very sick while they were going through the wormholes. So they were kept in a closed bubble. But when they emerged from the wormholes, they were able to walk around the ship freely. And they were shown the propulsion system, and anything they wanted to know, they were told. They didn't keep any secrets. And that's when they learned that they were traveling through wormholes. The commander knew they were traveling through time, but he wasn't sure how. They didn't have that information. He did say they were going through time waves. He called them time waves. Mm-hmm. And but the travel through a wormhole is instantaneous. It's going through a different dimension, essentially. So That's why they were able to travel 39 light years in 10 months. In other words, they traveled approximately 40 times the speed of light, which is incredible. So I think Einstein had broached the subject of wormholes, but I'm not sure he actually talked about them. But he did talk about space-time, and he did link up time as the fourth dimension of space, and that's how it all connects.
I want to back up just a tiny bit because I'm going to save the most of the discussion of the 12 going to SERPO for after the top of the hour, which is coming up on it. And I wanted to ask you, in these remains of the ships that they did find crashed, and maybe the one that they found in 1949 that wasn't crashed but no one was living, I think I remember you saying in the book that they found human body parts in those ships. Is that right?
Yeah, Philip Corso talked about that too in his book, The Day After Roswell. They did find human body parts, and that's what alarmed the military, because they thought that they were flesh-eating aliens, and that wasn't the case at all. They were simply bringing back human body parts to their planet because they had a very sophisticated DNA and biotechnology program there. That's why they were bringing them back.
And was there any way to tell whether they had actually killed the people whose body parts they had, or did they just pick them up, or how did they get them?
The commander asked that question when he got there, and he said they were not living, that those parts did not come from living beings.
Okay. Do you know if they also had any animal body parts like these animals? They did.
Yes, they had all kinds of creatures. This race of Ebens had journeyed throughout the galaxy. They had been traveling all over the galaxy for a very long time. So, needless to say, the knowledge and the information they had that they could share with us must have been incredible. And that information was given to us. So you can imagine what the military has under lock and key.
Wow. I'm going to want to try to work a couple of short things in before we take our break. Going back to the movie Close Encounters, if I remember correctly, there were 12 or 13 people lined up getting ready to get on that mothership at the end of Close Encounters. Isn't that right?
Yeah, 12.
12, okay.
10 men and 2 women.
There were 10 men and 2 women, and I know in your book you mentioned that there's some debate on whether it was all men that actually went to SERPO or if there were 10 men and 2 women. Do you know any more, since you wrote the book, about anything that could settle that?
Yeah, and I'll say what I said in the book. I ultimately came to the conclusion that was contentious for a while. It was debated because there were 2 women in the initial group that were trained. There were 16 trainees. 12 were going to be primary and 4 were going to be alternates. And my understanding was that the 2 women were in the alternate category, but they were not in the final cut. We only sent the 12 men. So Spielberg somehow got that wrong, but it may be because of the information that was given to him. We don't know. We don't know who gave him the information.
Okay. Do you think it was Go ahead.
Whoever gave it to him had to be in the DIA for sure. So okay. It was like it was a deep throat kind of person who must have given him that information, and that the movie was based on, because he got so much of it right. He got too many facts right.
But do you think that this anonymous on the serpo.org website was one of the scientists or the military personnel that worked with the Ebens, or the 12 that went up, or do you think it was a DIA member?
He wasn't. Anonymous is DIA.
Okay, he is DIA, but
yes,
he's also...
He said he was a retired DIA guy. He made that statement right at the beginning.
Okay.
He said he was speaking for 6 people. There were 6 DIA people involved in this revelation.
Okay.
3 of them were still active with the DIA, and 3 of them were retired. He was made the spokesman, and he was one of the retired people.
Wouldn't you? Let me put it this way. I would think that that's got to be a fairly small group of people that were involved in this, looking at the entire intelligence and military industrial complex and their employees. Wouldn't you think that someone like that coming out, even though he said he was anonymous, he's really risking his life to even bring some of this up because somebody's going to figure out who he is, who was also involved in it?
I don't think he cares. I think he doesn't bother him at all, because here's the story. This program, the final report was written in 1980. Government regulations require that classified information be kept secret for 25 years. That report was kept secret for 25 years to the day, and that's when he released it. So he followed the regulations. It was released from a classified status to the public, essentially. But we wouldn't have known about it if he didn't send in those emails to the thread list. And frankly, he was up so high in the intelligence network and the intelligence hierarchy that he had nothing to worry about. My belief is that he was part of MJ-12. So,
very interesting. Why don't, in your own words, tell everybody? I've been mentioning the name of the book, The Secret Journey to Planet SERPO. I've mentioned that it's available on Amazon.com. Where else could people find your book, Lynn?
You can get it in Barnes & Noble. They could, Barnes & Noble website. They can actually buy it at a Barnes & Noble bookstore. I've seen it there.
Okay.
It's at bookstores all over the world, actually, and it's freely available from the publisher, Bear & Company. Bear & Company is the publisher.
Is it also in Kindle and Nook, or is it only in paper?
It's in Nook, it's in the Barnes & Noble, and it's in Kindle, right, both.
Okay, great. What else was I going to ask you? Your website, et-secrethistory.com. We mentioned the SERPO.org website. Tell us what's on your website.
Well, my website probably seems a little amateurish to a lot of people because I did it myself. So I put it together myself. It includes reviews of the book. It includes excerpts. It includes reviews from both of my books, excerpts from both of my books. And also, I put together 2 pages full of videos that are applicable to the whole phenomena, and other information and links to other websites that may be of interest. So there's a lot of information out there other than just descriptions of the book.
What's in the videos, Lynn?
I took videos from YouTube and from other sources that support the whole fact that we have been dealing with ETs for a very long time. It's that simple, including Dr. Edgar Mitchell, Steven Spielberg, an interview with Spielberg made in 1977, right after he made the movie, in which he talks about why he made the movie, things like that, which I think will be of great interest to people.
Yeah, that's of great interest to me. I didn't notice those links on your website. I'm going to have to go back and check those out, too. Do you have anything on YouTube?
No, nothing on YouTube.
Okay. All right. Well, let me remind everybody, we've just got about another minute and a half here. Let's remind everybody that you're listening to Epic Voyages Radio online here at Inception Radio Network. We're in the chat room. If you go to inceptionradio.com and go to the chat room, and we'll be taking your questions. We're also going to be opening the phone line when we come back in a couple of minutes. The number is 888-919-2355. And tonight we're talking with Lynn Kasten, Kasten, about his book, actually about all of the remarkable details in his book, Secret Journey to Planet SERPO, published in 2013. And basically, after the wonderful history and lead-up that he gives in the first half of the book, we find out that 12 Americans actually got on board a mothership and flew 39-plus light years away and wound up living on another planet with 2 sons for what should have been 10 years, but because of the difficulty in telling Earth time on their planet, they wound up staying an extra 3 years before they came back. And that's where we're going after the break. We're going to talk the that they left. And as Lynn was saying before we took our break, oh, let's see here. They took on over 45 tons of supplies and equipment onto that mothership. They took food, of course, sea rations and other things. They left one Eben ambassador here on Earth who was taken to Los Alamos, where he lived in special quarters until our representatives came back, and then he went home. And I want you to also say something about the Yellow Book when we get to it, Lynn, but the 45 tons of supplies and equipment, I was really amazed at the kinds of things that they took. Can you tell folks listening what some of those things were that they took?
They took 3 Jeeps. They took 10 combat motorcycles. They took an incredible amount of measurement equipment. They took a lot of medical supplies, medical equipment, medical measuring equipment. They had to take gasoline naturally for the Jeeps and for the combat motorcycles. It's all in the book in one of the appendices. The entire everything they took is out there.
It's remarkable to me to think that they were taking. I mean, so you take a Jeep. What did they? How much fuel must they have taken to think that they were going to use it for very long?
I think they took at least 1,000 gallons of fuel. There might have been more. I'm not sure.
Wow.
I know at least 1,000 was mentioned in the list of stuff that they took.
So this Eben that they left when the 12. Oh, before I ask you this, I was horrified by the description of how these 12 people were treated while they were training for this program. And you mentioned that they thought they were leaving earlier, and as it turned out, it got postponed again. So for some number of years, tell everybody where they kept these 12 people who would normally be considered American heroes.
They kept them locked up at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, just like as though they were prisoners. They didn't want them out talking to anybody. This thing was the most highly compartmentalized, top-secret program you can imagine in 1965. And they weren't taking any chances of any of it getting out.
That's just amazing. And they literally, I guess, stayed in cells, locked up?
Well, Fort Leavenworth, I think, is not quite that bad. I think that maybe there were apartments or living quarters for the military that were not so bad. I'm not sure. They weren't really cells as we understand cells. Mm-hmm. No. And of course, they were treated much different than the average prisoners there.
I also was really interested in the roles or the functions or positions that these 12 had to cover. You had 2 pilots, and you had the group leader, the team leader, who is the one that kept the diary. You had a security master. Who else was in the group?
There was a team commander, which we know about. There was an assistant team commander. By the way, they were all given 3-digit numbers as new identities. Team commander was number 102. The assistant was 203. Then there were 2 pilots, Team Pilot 1 and Team Pilot 2. There were 2 linguists. There was a biologist, 2 scientists, 2 doctors, and a security man all together.
Were any of those individuals cross-trained in some of the other roles, or?
Yes, they were all cross-trained so that they could step into the shoes of one of the other people if they had to.
Okay. And so they left one Eben with us. And is that the one that you called Eben 1, or is that Eben 2?
That
Eben
was
1.
EB number 1, right.
Number 1. And tell everybody what the Yellow Book is. That was a fantastic detail, too.
Okay, let's talk about, first of all, the landings, okay? Mm-hmm. We have to talk about the landings because there was a remarkable thing that happened. The first craft that came here came in April of 1964. And we were under the impression that that was the one that our people would get on board and leave with. But when the aliens got here, they said they had changed their mind about that, and they were coming back again next year to pick up the 12 people. So this became a logistical nightmare because the 12 men had to go back to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas for a whole year and stay locked up. And the supplies had to be warehoused for another year. But the interesting thing about that particular landing was they sent 2 craft that came into our atmosphere on that date, on April 24th, 1964. The first one landed in the wrong place. It landed outside of Socorro, New Mexico, by the side of a road. And I don't know if any of your listeners have heard of the Lonnie Zamora incident.
Mm-hmm.
This was a very famous incident where a craft was discovered by a New Mexican policeman by the side of the road on that same date, April 24th, 1964. That was the craft that landed in the wrong place. That was the Lonnie Zamora incident. And if you recall the details of that incident, he responded to an emergency call and discovered the craft sitting on the ground, and 2 aliens were standing next to it. And when he said they looked like small humans, he said there was nothing else remarkable about them except that they were small. And when they saw him looking at them, they hopped back into the craft and took off. So that connects the Lonnie Zamora incident with the whole SERPO story, because eventually that craft did wind up in the right place, which was Holloman Air Force Base. But here's what Wikipedia says about that. What Zamora said.
Okay.
So he said Zamora only caught a brief sight of the 2 people in white coveralls beside the car, in quote unquote. He recalls nothing special about them. Quote, I don't recall noting any particular shape or possibly any hats or headgear. These persons appeared normal in shape, but possibly they were small adults or large kids. That's on Wikipedia. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were a lot of comments made to the YouTube version of this. And here's one of the comments that came in to the YouTube version of that. Quote, this was supposedly a planned visit between the aliens and the U.S. military, but the aliens landed at the wrong spot, exclamation point. They were to land and did eventually at the nearby Air Force Base. And that comment came from somebody named S4. Now, Area S4 is at Area 51. So this guy was in the know about the SERPO program, and he got it right. So I just wanted to make sure that people understand that the whole Lonnie Zamora thing, which was still considered one of the most outstanding UFO incidents, that links up with the whole SERPO story.
And he was law enforcement. He was a Leo, right?
Yes, he was law enforcement and a very, very, very credible guy.
I've been posting while we've been talking tonight, Lynn, some of the pictures from your book and a couple of other that I found online, a map of this part of New Mexico. I just put up 2 different photos of the Ebens. If you remember the one that I think you have in your book, that's actually a sculpting of a head and a neck from 2 different points of view.
Right.
And you said that they were, what did you say, 4 feet roundabout in height?
Between 4 and 5 feet,
4 and 5 feet, okay.
Now, one of the witnesses to the Roswell crash was a guy named by the name of Frank Kaufman, Kaufmann, and he described them exactly the way I have since found out, and the sculpture has been made of them exactly the same way. Mm-hmm. He saw the alien that crashed at Roswell. So that's another voice confirming how they looked.
Wow. Do you have anything that you can say about the Santilli video? Well,
I believe that Anonymous mentions somewhere on the SERPO website that it was a genuine autopsy. It was not a fake. And if you look at it and you see this creature, it looks like a small human being with a big gash in his leg.
Mm-hmm.
and 6 fingers and 6 toes. I mean, it looks very alien to me, although people are trying to convince me and other people that it's really a small human that was made up to look like an alien.
Mm-hmm. And that was not one of the SERPO inhabitants.
No,
That was
no.
a different alien.
That was the crash of May of 1947. That was
Okay.
before the Roswell crash.
Okay. Now, one of the most interesting things about, we were talking earlier about all the difficulties in communication. Tell everybody what the Yellow Book is.
Well, when they landed the first time in 1964, it was a ceremonial landing, and they were greeted by 16 of our people. And they gave us a gift when they landed, and that was the Yellow Book. The Yellow Book is it's not really a book. It looks like a book. It's about the same size as a book. But when you open it, pictures appear, and it's a history of the galaxy going back to 2000 BC, supposedly. And the pictures are real pictures detailing that history. It's a remarkable book because it communicates to the reader in the reader's own language. In other words, if the reader holds the book near his face, which he would do if he was trying to read it, it knows what language he thinks in, and so it would give him information in that language. And according to Anonymous, it was able to translate into 80 different Earth languages.
Wow.
And here's what... Yeah, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
One of the people who did try and read the Yellow Book said that it's the aliens' history of our universe written by the aliens themselves, as well as their interactions and involvement with Earth's development and evolution. It was brought to Earth and presented to the U.S. government at the famous Holloman Air Force Base landing in April 1964. It was presented by EBE number 2, who was a female, and she was the one who translated it into English. He says further, it's not really a book. It's a block of material approximately 2.5 inches thick and transparent in nature and appearance. The reader looks at the transparent surface, and suddenly words and pictures appear. It is an endless series of historical stories and photographs of our universe and the Eben planet and their former home world, and other interesting stories about the universe. He says, to this day, I am one of the very few people who has actually seen and read the Yellow Book. As has been commented by others, it would take a lifetime to read it and another lifetime to understand it.
One of the things that I remember you said in your book that frustrated me about this Yellow Book is that there is no bookmarks. If you start it and you can only get to page 78 and you have to stop for whatever reason, when you pick it back up again, you have to start over at page 1 again.
That's right. And that's the way it works.
That's very annoying. Here's another question from the chat room. Let me remind everybody the dial-in number, 888-919-2355 to talk directly to Lynn and Kasten. What is your take on the fact that humans lived on SERPO for 13 years, but they were never allowed to meet the actual hierarchy or the government leaders, although Eben, who came to our planet, actually did meet some of ours?
Well, I think that the Ebens realized that their science was so far ahead of ours that they had really nothing to learn from us. So they didn't bother introducing them to the top people, our people. But nevertheless, when they came back, they filled up a 3,000-page book, and our people would debrief for a solid year when they came back, and they kept in isolation for another year. And so they must have learned a lot, but I don't think they actually got to the top people on SERPO.
Now let's talk about the team now, because I don't want to leave too many people. I don't want to leave people hanging too much on some of these details. We know that it was over 39 light years away, and it involved traveling through wormholes. And their power source was it antimatter, or what was the power source?
They did have antimatter. Before we leave the other subject, I want to mention one thing.
Okay.
The whole reason for the story about Germany and Antarctica was to indicate how badly we needed some help to counteract what was turning out to be the Fourth Reich in Antarctica with the craft that they had, and which Admiral Byrd was so worried about. And when only 3 months later this alien craft crashed into the desert in New Mexico, you can imagine how happy we were and how pleased we were to be able to get technology that could match what the Germans had in Antarctica. Mm-hmm. And that's why I wrote that entire prelude, was to make that point.
So it was a competitive edge that just sort of landed in our lap.
Exactly. And that's why it was treated with top secrecy, and why we brought them to Los Alamos right away. And then, as I said, they did give us one of their craft as a gift the following year, 1953.
Mm-hmm. The one of them who stayed behind here with us for the 13 years, what all did he do? Is there any record of where he went? Did he travel? I mean, what happened? Do you know?
I don't know how long he stayed here, but my guess is that the aliens came back. The Ebens came back 9 times after that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so he was taken back on one of those trips. I'm not sure.
Okay, all right. That must have zipped right by me. I don't remember that. Okay, that kind of makes a lot more sense in him being stuck here for the whole 13 years.
Right. There were 9 landings. The last one was in 2010 on Johnston Island in the mid-Pacific.
Okay, let's go back to the first trip, though, to SERPO now. It was a difficult trip because of the whatever it did to the humans' physical bodies traveling through the interdimensional time warps, and they land. We've got so much architecture and archaeological evidence here on this planet that they're finding enormous monoliths, and the question is, how did people who only use stone tools, not only craft this, but how did they lift these blocks up and stack them on top of each other? How did they get that 45 tons of material that they took with them? Yeah, over 45 tons. How did they get all that onto the mothership?
Now, the commander said that it was taken on in one movement, so they must have had anti-gravity capabilities to do that, because if they could move all that equipment in one move, 45 tons, then they did have anti-gravity. And of course, when they got there, they discovered that they did indeed have anti-gravity, because they traveled around the planet on a what looked like a helicopter but had no blades. It was anti-gravity, and also the cars that they used were anti-gravity. They never touched the ground.
Do you know if they were able to bring any of that technology back with them?
Well, we have to assume, of course, they did. They were very free. They were very free with information. They didn't hold anything back. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the things that was great about the relationship, was that they were very, very, very honest about everything.
But so much more intelligent comparatively than we are, that they didn't feel like they needed to learn anything from us.
Exactly. They might have liked our atomic energy. I'm not sure. They seem to be surveilling the 509th Bomb Group, which was our atomic bomb delivery group. So they may have had interest in that, but apparently that was the only thing that interested them. That and the biotechnology.
Okay. Got another question here from the chat room. Would you care to weigh in on Richard Doty's involvement?
Richard Doty wrote an article for UFO magazine, I believe, in which he more or less said that he did believe that this happened.
Mm-hmm.
But as to his involvement, I don't think he was involved in the program itself because he was an Air Force Office of Special Investigation, and this program was all handled by the DIA completely. And it was so highly compartmentalized that I doubt very much if any other organization had any part in it other than the DIA.
Mm-hmm. Here's another interesting question. What's the difference between wormholes and a warp drive? Are those two different kinds of technologies, or?
I think the closest thing to a wormhole would be a Stargate.
Okay.
And that means that, as you know from the movie, which I think was pretty accurate in a lot of ways,
Mm-hmm.
Stargate is really goes through time. And that would have to be the case because these other distant planets are so far away that if we weren't able to travel through time, there's no way that they could be covered. The distance could be covered in any reasonable amount of time.
I think I remember that somewhere in the book that it was like 200 and something actual Earth days, more or less, that it took them to get to SERPO.
SERPO is 240 trillion miles away.
Right.
Okay, that to put it in perspective. And it took them a little over 9 months to get there.
Okay.
So it means they traveled at 40 times the speed of light. They couldn't have done that
Mm-hmm.
if they hadn't traveled through the wormholes. And the wormhole travel supposedly is instantaneous. So once they got in the wormhole, they were there at the other end of it instantly. So most of the time taken up by the 9 months was probably in navigation, stellar navigation, and acceleration and deceleration to and from the wormholes.
Mm-hmm. And do I remember that one of the 12 actually died on the trip?
Yes, one of them did die on the trip.
What was that person's function or role on the team? Do you know? Do you remember?
Yeah, he was number 308. He had the designation number 308, and he was the team pilot number 2.
Okay.
2 pilots. He was the second one. And the reason they sent 2 pilots in this group was they actually believed that if our team encountered a hostile environment, they would be able to get onto the alien craft and fly it back to Earth. And that was a very naive supposition because in 1964, when these people were being trained, they had no idea about wormholes. They didn't know about wormholes. They didn't know anything about antimatter propulsion. So to believe that this pilot could have hopped onto an alien craft, which they were trained on. They were trained on the one that was found at Datil, New Mexico. That was part of their training. So there was the belief that they would be able to escape from the planet if they needed to.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why they sent 2 pilots.
It's just amazing.
Yeah.
So that they arrived 11 intact, although maybe nauseated or headaches or whatever. 1 deceased. What happened to the one that was deceased when they finally did land? Did they bury him? Did they put him in some kind of cryogenic tank? Or?
Well, the commander wanted to know what happened to the body, and he wasn't getting any answers. They said the body no longer exists. He said, what do you mean the body no longer exists? He said, that body belongs to planet Earth, U.S. Air Force. They said, well, we considered it an honor to have that body to work on, and the body no longer exists. We've used the parts to clone other beings.
Oh, my goodness.
So he was furious, and for a while the confrontation got very serious, and the commander said to go get the guns. And when the female EB number 2 heard that word, she said, no guns, please, no guns. And she begged him not to get the guns, to blow open the container that he thought contained the body of 308.
Mm-hmm.
She said that I will go and get the doctor who knows all about this and bring him here. Because the commander was reluctant to even leave the area of where the body was, or thought the body was. He wanted to give it a decent burial on SERPO. And the doctor showed up, and it turned out he spoke perfect English. He was able to speak perfect English, which was really amazing because the commander said, "Where has this guy been for the last 18 months?" Anyway, he smoothed the whole thing over, told them that they had created a cloned creature that was part human and part Eben, and they had used the body parts in their biotechnology program. And so the commander said he wanted to see what they were doing, and they allowed him to go into this building where they had all of these creatures in tubs that were being kept on life support. And he said it was horrible. He was completely revolted by what he saw there. He said, horrible creatures. And then he said, I'd like to see the clone of 308 and that you've created. So they brought him into another building where they had this creature who was part American or human and part Eben. And the commander was completely disgusted. And he said later in his diary, he said, I have seen the dark side of this civilization. And the reason he said that is because in 1965, when he went there, they had no real knowledge about DNA or any of that stuff. To the Ebens, this was simply science. It wasn't evil. Mm-hmm. They were simply experimenting and working with what they called science. Mm-hmm. And to him, it was horrible and revolting.
They were sort of very big on recycling in a way.
Yeah, you could say that. Yeah, exactly.
Did the Ebens have anything to do tens of thousands of years ago with our own genetic engineering? Did they ever find out about that?
They told him that they had been coming here for about 2,000 years, okay, and that they knew about the person we call Jesus, that they had witnessed him, and that was in the Yellow Book. Mm-hmm. Whether they had anything to do with bioengineering the human species, that was never said or revealed, and my guess is they did not.
Okay. 2,000 years wouldn't go back that far.
Far enough, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so SERPO. Here we are on SERPO. What's it like? There's 2 stars, right? 2 suns?
Yes, 2 suns, right.
Okay, tell us about SERPO. Would we want to go there for a vacation or not?
Well, where they landed on the equatorial region, and it was extremely hot, much too hot for comfort. But they put the team in an underground quarters, so it was a little cooler down there. But they lived in that hot zone for 6 years. Although they did explore the other parts of the planet, which is very similar to our planet. It was about the same size. We have, of course, do have a hot equatorial region as well, but not like theirs. I think they said the temperature was about 114 when they landed.
Yuck.
And very uncomfortable.
Sounds like Houston.
Yeah. Or even Phoenix, you know. maybe worse than Phoenix. But Phoenix is almost as bad as that.
And there was if they went away from the equator, it was better. It never got what you'd call cold, but I remember reading that some part that they really liked was a lot like Montana.
Yeah, they came to the northern quadrant. They eventually explored the entire planet. And what they called quadrant number 1, they nicknamed that Little Montana. Mm-hmm. And in my book, I included a photograph of Montana just so people could get an understanding of what it was like, and they loved it up there. It was cool. They had birch trees and all kinds of water and everything. And the Ebens built them a little community there so they could live there, and that's how they spent the last 7 years of their habitation there. So it was pretty nice at that point.
Well, I know you said that they took K rations or C rations or whatever, meals ready to eat. How did that food last them, and what did they do when they ran out of their Earth food?
When they ran out, they had to eat the Eben food. They had no choice. They initially said that it tasted like paper, but eventually they found something that was like fruit, and after tasting various things, they settled on some things that were palatable and tolerable, and the water tasted very badly, but they eventually got used to it, and they cleaned up the water. They were able to clean it up and drink it. Mm-hmm. And So after a while, they settled into eating even food. They had no choice.
So I guess it must have rained in order for them to have an area that looked like Montana. It must have rained at least in those parts of the planet, right?
Evidently, right? Yeah, evidently.
Okay.
I don't. They don't talk about that.
Um, I know if I don't ask you this, one of my clever colleagues in the chat room will ask you, so I'll go ahead and ask. What did they do when they had to go number one or number two?
Well, on the alien craft that they traveled on, there were no bathrooms, and the Evans gave them a little pot to use, and then they would come around and empty it for them. That's how it worked out on the craft. And when they got,
I'm sorry, so they were not in like suspended animation. They were like awake for the whole 9 months.
oh yeah, they had gravity on the craft. Yeah, of course. I mean, you thought they thought might be floating around up there?
No, I thought they might be in those little pods like in Aliens, you know, when Ripley went in the kitty cat into one of the pods. So that would make a very long 9 months if all you had to do was a little bucket, and that's
right.
all you had.
That's all they had, and but they were at the Evans did come in and empty them for them. They had a whole different way. Their body was totally different, so their elimination was much simpler. At one point, the team commander said it was more like a cat going to the bathroom. So anyway, that was the case on SERPO as well. They were given something like I guess like you'd use in an RV, I don't know, something like that. And it worked out okay.
Or maybe sort of like in the old days when they used to have a little bowl underneath the bed and you just bring it out when you needed it.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Wow, and for this they got to live in Leavenworth for a couple of years. Great.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And I forgot to mention, they did something when these guys were training. They literally scrubbed all information that pointed to the fact that these people ever existed before they ever left, right?
That's right. One of the requirements was that the volunteers had to have, they could not be married. They preferred people who were either orphans themselves and also had no children. They wanted people with absolutely no family ties, if possible, and they what they call sheep dipped their background. They erased their entire background.
Sheep dipped, right?
Sheep dipped. That's what they call it.
Wow. Okay, so, and you mentioned earlier, even two, the female who sort of became almost like a counselor in a way. She tried to interface with her people and them in a way that was very sensitive to the humans' feelings and perspective, right?
Yeah, she was. The commander became very fond of her because she was so understanding and so sensitive, and she spoke pretty good English, and she was very caring and very diplomatic. She was a combination hostess, interpreter, guide, you name it. She did it all.
Wow.
He relied heavily on her.
Yeah. So they lost the one guy in transit. How many others made it to the return trip?
Well, two died on SERPO. So 3 died altogether, and then 2 decided to remain there. So only 7 returned.
Okay, and you said that 2 of the individuals decided they wanted to stay.
Yeah, they wanted to stay. 2 remained there.
Okay.
I believe the 2 that died on SERPO, one was a doctor, and the other one was the security man. So I believe it was number 700 was the doctor, and the security guy was 899. Those 2 died on SERPO.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And
I don't know which 2 remained there. I don't know which 2 remained there.
That's just what I was going to ask. Okay. Very interesting. And you figure that they're probably not still alive?
Probably not. Of course, you know, after they moved to that Montana-like environment, I'm sure it was pretty nice there, the lifestyle. I mean, they didn't have much to do but explore the planet and these two guys figured, hey, this is great. Let's stay here.
One of our clever chat room attendees wants to know what the men did for companionship.
Well, this is a question that a lot of people have brought up. I don't know the answer to that, but here's my thought on this subject. If you want the answer, I don't
Well,
think
we asked about their toilets, so we might as well ask about this.
Yeah, no, it's a logical question, and they were there for 13 years, so they had to have some kind of an outlet. And if you want my thought on this wasn't mentioned by Anonymous, but I'll give you my opinion if you want it.
Okay.
We know that these aliens traveled throughout the galaxy, and we know they returned to Earth 9 times. My guess is that somewhere in these travels, they brought back women.
Mm-hmm.
And it just wasn't discussed in on the website, that's all. I mean, they had plenty of opportunities to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And it would seem logical that that would happen. And I think that's what happened, but I don't know. I don't know for sure.
It's probably one of those small details that we'll never really have to do.
Well, it's probably in that 3,000-page book at Bowling Air Force Base under lock and key.
And that does still exist.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Absolutely.
My goodness. Wouldn't you love to get you...
As well as 3,000 photographs.
Oh. Wouldn't you love to get your hands on that?
I would. I really would. Yes, I would.
Say a little bit about how reckoning time caused such a problem for them and resulted in them having to stay 3 years later because they weren't really sure how long they'd been there.
Of course, it never got dark on SERPO. While the planet itself revolved around one of the suns, not both, one sun at least was always in the sky, so it never got dark. It got it maybe down to like dusk, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't really know when the days began and ended, and according to my calculations, what was considered one day on SERPO would have been 43 days on Earth. I'm sorry, 43 hours would have been the equivalent of 24 hours on Earth.
Okay.
So they had a lot of computations to do. Their batteries died on them after a few years. All their time clock pieces stopped working.
Mm-hmm.
They had to rely on even time, and that's what they did. They just said, "To heck with it. We'll just go by even time." And so they never knew really how much time had elapsed on Earth.
And that whole concept of even time, I forgot about that. That was wild. They were so regimented and structured that whatever their timepiece was that said, okay, now it's time for you to stop what you're doing and go do the next thing. The whole civilization would just drop what they're doing and go to the next step, right?
Yeah, they were highly regimented. It was almost like 1984, like the book 1984. They had a tower there. They said it was about 300 feet high with a mirror on top. And as the planet rotated and the pattern on the ground changed with regard to the sun, they would stop what they were doing and go on to the next activity en masse altogether. And that's how they regimented their lives, was by the movement around that tower.
Mm-hmm.
They also had what we now would call smartphones. They had something like them that they wore on their belts all the time, and they would also be regimented by being given instructions through that device on their belts. So it was really, truly a police state in every sense of the word.
It's interesting to kind of conceptualize super, super smart individuals in a society where they allow themselves to be so highly structured, no degrees of freedom, and it almost implies no outlet for creativity.
Exactly, and I made that point in the book. Our team eventually estimated that the average IQ of the average even was 160, according to our measurements. So they were very, very smart. They were very intelligent. And that's why they were able to learn English when we couldn't learn their language. Mm-hmm. But in any case, they were highly regimented. and highly controlled. And that's probably why we were not allowed to meet the upper echelons, the hierarchy, because they were apparently the ones that were doing the controlling.
Very interesting. So I don't think I asked you about the gravity. It must have been pretty similar to Earth.
Yeah, very similar. I have all that information is in one of the appendices in the book.
Mm-hmm. Two questions here, both from the chat room. Did the Ebens and Valiant Thor ever come across each other? Because they overlap somewhat in time.
No, I don't believe so. They were highly compartmentalized. This program was highly compartmentalized. We needed this technology badly, and they were giving us, and we didn't cross pollinate it with anybody else, as far as I know. Mm-hmm. It remained completely in the Defense Intelligence Agency and a few other high echelon people, including MJ-12.
Another question: did the Ebens have anything like a deity? Did they have a religion?
Yes, they did. They did have a religion, and it was similar in a lot of ways to the Catholic religion. They believed in a creator. They didn't call him a creator. They had another name for it. I have a chapter on the Eben religious beliefs in the book. At one of the landings that they made in 2009, they landed at Johnston Island in the mid-Pacific. That was November the 10th of 2009. At that meeting, we invited the Vatican, we invited the United Nations, we invited White House representatives from the Obama administration, 2 U.S. intelligence officers, a linguist. We invited representatives from Russia and from China. So we opened it up at that meeting. But it's interesting that the Vatican was involved in that. Mm-hmm. And my understanding is that they exchanged gifts. The Vatican exchanged gifts with the Ebens and gave them some very, very valuable paintings. But that they had a similar belief system to the Catholic religion.
Interesting.
With the Catholics, we're very happy to hear about.
And that was 2009. That's not that long ago. That went under the radar. Nobody seems to have known about that either. No,
that went under the radar. That's right.
That's amazing.
If you look at a picture of Johnston Island, it looks just like a large aircraft carrier. The whole thing is one runway, is all it is, with some barracks. So it's entirely run by the military. So it was completely safe to have them land there.
Interesting. Let's see. Here's another question, hot question right out of the chat room. Is this the reason why the Vatican came out with the acceptance statement?
I think it might have had something to do with it. I don't know when that statement was made by, Father Balducci? Was he the one that made that?
I'm not sure. I'm a good one to ask.
Balducci died several years ago, but he was the main Vatican point man with regard to extraterrestrials, so he would probably have been the one. But that sounds like it might have been connected. Yeah, I agree with that.
Actually, you have a picture of him in the book. 2008 he died.
Right, okay.
Corrado Balducci.
Yeah.
Let me just stop for a minute and give another plug to the book. If you haven't read this book yet, I really seriously recommend that you look for it, either at Amazon.com. Tell them to go away.
Okay, I got it. Yeah, I got it. No problem.
Look for The Secret Journey to Planet SERPO by Lynn Kasten, Kasten. You can find it online through Barnes & Noble, through Amazon.com. You can also find links for it at Lynn's website, et-secrethistory, all one word, secrethistory.com. And in case you're joining us really late, because we only have about 7 or 8 minutes left now. We've been talking with Lynn Kasten, the author of The Secret Journey to Planet SERPO, and this incredible story of 12 Americans who traveled to Planet SERPO in 1965 and stayed there for 13 years and then came back. So 2 stayed, 1, 2, 3 deceased, that's 5. So 7 of them living actually came back, and they're probably, none of them are alive still, right, Lynn?
Yeah, the last one died in 2002.
2002.
Florida.
And how well did they, I don't know how to say this, sustain physically their 13-year trip there?
They had absorbed an awful lot of radiation because of the 2 suns on SERPO, and my understanding is that I don't know exactly what age they were when they died, but my guess is they died at a relatively early age, perhaps in the early 60s or in their late 50s. 2002, meaning if he left in 65 and came back and died in 2002, so 67 years had elapsed, and they died relatively young because of the radiation. But they were given a very large settlement, financial settlement. They never had to work again. That much I found out.
And how long were they debriefed when did that go on just a year or a couple of years, or?
They were debriefed, they were kept in isolation for 1 year after they came back, and they were debriefed by the Air Force Office of Special Investigation. That may be how Richard Doty got involved. I don't know if he was involved in the debriefing or not, but they were involved, and by the DIA for a solid year, and then they were released into civilian life. If they chose to become civilians, if they chose to remain in the military, they had that option as well.
Someone in the chat room is asking about a rumor that there are ETs living in the Vatican right now. Do you know anything about that?
It wouldn't surprise me, because I know the Vatican has a very large observatory in Mormon Lake, Arizona, that they've had for many years, and they've been very interested in extraterrestrial life for a very long time. That would not surprise me, although I have no evidence of it.
Interesting. Very interesting. Okay, I'm going to give out that phone line one more time. Folks, you're running out of time. If you want to ask Lynn a question personally, it's 888-919-2355. We're talking with Lynn Kasten, the author of The Secret Journey to Planet SERPO. And we've only got about 5 or 6 minutes left now. So while we're waiting for some more questions that come in, Lynn, what are you doing right now for the next, say, 6-10 months, something like that? Do you have some speaking engagements?
Yeah, I'll be speaking at UFOCon in Santa Clara, California in March, the end of March, on this subject. And I just completed an interview with Gaiam TV in Colorado.
Okay.
But really now I'm working on another book, so it's going to be my main preoccupation.
What's your new book about?
Well, it's complicated, but it's on a similar subject. It expands our entire connection with ETs of other races.
Mm-hmm. One thing I thought of asking you, and I didn't make a note of it, and I'm glad I just remembered it. How did you get started on this trail of this particular subject matter?
Well, when I was in the Air Force, which was shortly after college, I had experience with a UFO that I believe I was taken on board, and somehow, whatever happened on that incident, got stored in my subconscious, such that a few years later I decided to join NICAP and started doing research on UFOs. So whatever it was that happened to me, it must have motivated me in this direction. Mm-hmm. And that's the only thing I can come up with, because I've never been hypnotized to find out what actually happened in that encounter.
That was going to be my next question, is if you've ever been regressed. Do you think you might ever do that? Yeah,
I'm planning on it. I may do it this year at the UFO Congress, which is coming up this week, as a matter of fact, next week.
Do you have a blog or anything on your website where you kind of update us on what's going on with you from week to week?
No, I don't. I haven't done that. I have not done that, but I'm contemplating it. A lot of people have asked me about that, so I might do it.
I think that's a good idea. I would really like to know if you do get regressed. I'd like to know if it's a surprise to you what you find out or not. I can't think of a better way to find out about it than through a blog.
Okay, well, I'll probably share it on my website regardless.
Okay. And again, for the listeners, that website is et-secrethistory.com. We've got another question in the chat room. This is really interesting. I didn't think of this. Did the Ebens have an exchange program with some other planets? And did our 12 exchange cadets meet aliens from other worlds while they were there on SERPO?
While they were eating in it was like a cafeteria, a strange creature entered the room. And according to the commander, he looked more or less like what's known as the praying mantis type of alien.
Mm-hmm.
And the commander was astounded, and he asked EB number 2 who that was, and she said it was just a visitor. So apparently they have visitors from other planets all the time. It's not a big deal.
Wow. And they must have brought back the deceased crew members that were not used for experimental studies, right?
Yes, I would imagine that the 2 bodies of the 2 that died there were not given to the Ebens to carve up into small pieces again.
And I know we asked you earlier about deity and religion. Did they bury their own dead?
Yeah, they do. They do bury the dead. Yes, they do. And they have very elaborate funeral ceremonies.
And it's burial. It's not cremation or something like that.
Right. Yeah, it's burial.
And there are families. It's like husbands and wives and children. They do raise children.
Yeah, they're allowed to have 2 children. That's it.
Okay. And I remember reading in the book you said that they really do have a lot of fun, good times with each other when they're not working.
Yeah, they invited our team to one of their feasts, and everybody had a great time. And we tried to teach them how to play baseball, but they could never understand why they weren't allowed to allow the ball to hit the ground. They could never figure that out. But they had some very strange games that they like to play, and they love music. They have their own type of music too.
Interesting. Well, I'm getting a signal from producer here, Lynn, that we've got about 60 seconds left. Let me put in a plug for next week's show. Aaron Judkins will be here. I'm not sure who his guest is, but I know everybody looks forward to Aaron's guests and his topics. And in 2 weeks, Alan Smith, our new host, one of our new hosts, is going to be talking with Ray Hernandez from the Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters, FREE. I'm going to be talking to Louis Buff Perry again on the 16th of March about his cracking the Proto-Dynastic Egyptian Code. And that's not a very good title for that. I've got to work on it, but Buff will be back with us then. Lynn, thank you so much for being with us tonight. And I've loved the conversation. I love the book. I hope our listeners do check it out because it's well worth the time to read it.
Thanks a lot, Laurel. It's really been fun being with you.
Well, good. And I definitely am going to keep checking your website. Hope that you do get a blog or something going there. And everybody make sure to look at our website for our upcoming schedule, epicvoyagers.com.